Each year, before I begin writing my Rosh Hashanah sermon, I look back to remind myself about what I spoke about the year before. Do you remember? Didn't think there'd be a test, did you? It was titled, "The Secrets of Jewish Survival," and at the end of the sermon, I quoted Elie Wiesel, who said, "Jews do not despair." How did that go for you this year? I admit that I've experienced more than a few moments of despair this past year. 48 hostages still in Gaza after 718 days. Ongoing war, rising anti-Semitism, polarization, corruption, threats to democracy. It's been another hard year. And sometimes the challenges obscure the blessings. How many of you remember that REM song? It's the end of the world as we know it, but I feel fine. That's kind of how I've been feeling the last few years. Caught between the very real and very frightening things happening in our country, in Israel, and around the world, while also going about my relatively calm and safe life. Have you felt this way? Maybe you're feeling it right now. I don't take this feeling for granted. Far too many people are threatened by real terrorist hatred and discrimination. But the truth is that it is the end of the world as we know it. Things are changing fast. Institutions and values that we took for granted are under threat. And in a moment like this, fear and uncertainty take over. Maybe I don't feel fine. I was talking about this with Rabbi Lindemann a few weeks ago, and we wondered if there was one word that could sum up how we were feeling at this moment. What would this word be? The word we landed on was conflicted. Conflicted about our relative comfort while there are so many in real distress. Conflicted about what direction our country should take and about how to get there. Conflicted about what's happening in Israel and Gaza. While I was writing this, I received an email from one member of our community who wanted to know why we weren't talking more about the suffering in Gaza, while at the same time I was getting text messages from another person in our community who wanted us to take a stronger line in standing up for Israel. Conflicted. The truth is, I feel conflicted even about telling you that I'm conflicted. We live in a world that has no patience for nuance. There is only this side or that side, right or wrong, with us or against us. Will I sound weak or wishy-washy by sharing my conflicts with you? But in such a polarized world, how can we not feel conflicted? And if any of you are not feeling conflicted, you at least must be feeling conflicted about all of us who are feeling conflicted. And our sense of conflict manifests itself in our own lives. We feel conflicted about relationships with family and friends that have deteriorated because of disagreements, especially about politics or Israel. I have had more conversations with so many of you over this past year about that than I can count. In such a complicated and violent world, how do we raise children and grandchildren? We want our kids to go to a good college, but what is a good college for Jews today? That's a very real question for Rachel and me, as Yael is a senior in high school, and we're in the middle of her college search. Where will she be safe and happy and be able to study and enjoy college like we did? Is it really that bad on all campuses? Of course not. Are there campuses that are hostile environments for Jews? Absolutely. And that leads me to another conflict. How do we know what's a real threat and what is overblown by social media? I admit that as I was writing this, I hesitated to reference REM's song about the end of the world as we know it, because their lead singer has been very critical of Israel on Instagram. How many of you have had this conflict? A favorite musician, comedian, or actor whose comments on Israel, Jews, or politics have made you reconsider your fandom? Anyone watch the Emmys? Or perhaps with a newspaper or a radio station that you have to shut off or consider canceling your subscription. I'm conflicted about this too. Can I still play Wordle while ignoring the New York Times reporting on Israel? Another conflict. Is Carson Wentz the quarterback who will take the Vikings to the Super Bowl? Yeah, I know none of you are conflicted about that one. You never know. We come here today on Rosh Hashanah, our Jewish New Year, to work out our conflicts, to look deep within our souls and reflect on how we can mend the conflicts we have with family, with friends, and even within ourselves, to check in with ourselves to see if we are really living our values. One of the major themes of Rosh Hashanah is how we convince God to navigate God's own conflict between Din and Rachamim, between justice and mercy. Our tradition pictures God sitting in judgment over all creation today. Nearly every single prayer we say in our Machzor is an argument trying to convince God to judge us mercifully, to give us the benefit of the doubt, not to be too strict with us. We picture those scales of justice with mercy and justice on either side, and we wonder, how does God balance them out? How do we balance them out as we look around this conflicted world? The bad news is that there are forces at play in our world that are simply beyond our control. Many have argued that we're living through a transitional moment in history. One stage in history is ending and another is beginning. It is a moment that Professor Stephen Windmuller, who has been doing research and work in the Jewish community for years, calls in the betweens. This is a time when societies must determine their future pathways, which causes, he writes, authoritarian political impulses, with initiatives designed to return society to a traditional or safe space. America first, socialism, conquering the entire land of Israel. These are all symptoms of living at a time when we feel stuck and where extreme ideologies can rush in to fill the vacuum. This is what happens when living in the betweens. The good news is that Jews are not stranger to living and even thriving in a conflicted world. Many key moments in Jewish history have occurred around these paradigm shifts. The destruction of the first temple led to making Judaism portable. The destruction of the second temple led to rabbinic innovations, which created the Judaism we live today. The Crusades and the expulsion from Spain led to innovations in Jewish mysticism that changed Jewish practice. The Enlightenment brought Judaism into modernity. Jewish immigration to America, especially in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, brought the creation of a new kind of Judaism, an American Judaism, which has been defined for most of our lifetimes by the unprecedented freedom to be as Jewish as we want to be. The Holocaust led just 3 years later to the founding of the State of Israel. Our Jewish superpower has been navigating troubled and conflicted times. Our ancestors did it before, and now it's our turn. What can we learn from their experience? And what do we bring to this conflicted moment? When I was growing up and active in youth groups like USY and going to Camp Ramah, one of the most popular discussion group topics was about living an internal conflict that is familiar to all of us. The question was usually posed like this: do you consider yourself a Jewish American or an American Jew? I hear from some of you, you're familiar with that conversation. Then it was an opportunity to talk about the conflicts that came up inherent to living a Jewish life in a free society. For me, that conflict came up most in terms of Jewish observance. I grew up in a kosher home, but chose not to eat unkosher food when I went out with friends. And in high school, I decided to become more observant of Shabbat, which meant that I didn't attend football games or dances at my public high school on Friday night, and instead stayed home for Shabbat dinner. Choices like these ultimately led me on my path here to stand before you today on this bima. What are the choices that you've made that bring you here today? What conflicts have you navigated between your Jewish and American identities? And how have those conflicts evolved over the past year? Our dual identity of being Jewish and American is symbolized right here on our bima by two flags: the American flag and the Israeli flag. Almost all synagogues in America, regardless of denomination, have these two flags in their holiest space. According to historian Gary Zola, synagogues started putting the American flag on their bima during World War I as a tribute to the soldiers and as a patriotic symbol. And some synagogues added the Israeli flag to their bimas at this time too in support of Zionism, but most shuls added that Israeli flag after Israel's Declaration of Independence in 1948. These two flags represent not only our dual identities, but our shared values, values whose meaning are also a source of conflict today. Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, in his book For Such a Time as This, writes about how we navigate our different identities. For him, the most important part of this debate is the hyphen between those words Jewish and American. He writes, "We are all composite creations, Irish American, Asian American, Jewish American. Our race, our religion, ethnicity, sexuality, nationality, and so many other markers of identity are set in dialogue, sometimes complementary, often at odds. The challenge and opportunity of American Jewry is situated on the hyphen at the heart of our identity. Our attachments to one another, to our Judaism and to Israel, require delicate balancing acts, a lifetime of negotiations taking place within our hearts, our homes, and our global community. The foods we eat, the observances we keep, the people we marry, the loyalties we hold, every decision is shaped by the push and pull originating in this hyphen." Rabbi Cosgrove goes on to point out that living this tension, living the hyphen, is not a new American phenomenon. It can actually be traced back to the Torah. The very first diaspora Jewish community was in Egypt, when Jacob and his sons came there to reunite with Joseph at the end of the book of Genesis. We know that Joseph does well for himself in Egypt and raises two Jewish Egyptian sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. On Jacob's deathbed, he calls for his grandsons to be brought to him for a final blessing. When they arrive, Jacob asks, "Mi ele? Who are they?" Could this be because Ephraim and Manasseh were so assimilated into Egyptian culture that Jacob didn't even recognize his own grandsons? Perhaps this is why a midrash pictures a scene where Joseph and his sons reassure Jacob that they remain true to their heritage by quoting these familiar words. Shema Yisrael, listen Israel, Jacob's other name. Adonai Eloheinu, your God is our God. Adonai Echad. We too believe that God is one. To this day, every Friday night, we bless our children by asking God to make them like Ephraim and Manasseh. We pray that they too will be able to live the hyphen by staying true to their heritage, no matter where they live. We all work to live the hyphen in how we navigate the inevitable conflicts of our different identities, Jewish, American, and otherwise. I also think, however, we need to acknowledge that some identities are more permanent. This point was driven home for me this summer. In July, Rachel and I had the opportunity to travel to Israel, where we caught up with family. And then in August, I got to officiate at my first cousin's wedding in Switzerland. Pretty cool, right? There are some perks to being a rabbi. In addition to the incredible scenery and the delicious chocolate that we ate too much of, another highlight was meeting my cousin's bride's family who live in Geneva. One of the things that struck me about both visits was how, despite our different languages and different accents, our family history was the same. Each of us, my relatives in Israel, my new relatives in Switzerland, and I, all had grandparents who were born in Poland. Either right before or after the Holocaust, they ended up in Israel, Switzerland, or America, which means that they all started out as Polish Jews and then became Swiss Jews, Israeli Jews, and American Jews. What did we all have in common? I'm just seeing how long it would go. Good. That's right, being Jews. Our Jewish identity is what stays with us no matter where we go. It is what guided our ancestors through difficult times like these, and what guides us through our own conflicts today. So how did that Jewish identity guide our ancestors, and how can it guide us? There was a powerful story this year that addresses these questions. Last February, Israeli hostage Or Levy was freed from his captivity in Gaza after 491 days. While hostage, Or was starved, abused, and it was only upon his release that he learned that his wife, Einav, had been murdered by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. After his release, Or shared a quote told to him by fellow hostage Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who was murdered by his captors at the end of August last year. On their 52nd day of captivity, Hirsch told Or, "One who has a why can bear almost any how." Hirsch's parents, Rachel and John, later told Or that Hirsch learned that quote from reading Holocaust survivor and psychologist Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Or said, "This sentence accompanied me ever since, and perhaps thanks to it I survived that terrible inferno. My why is my son, Almog, and I knew that I would survive anything for him. Against all odds, Or did survive, and he attributes his survival to knowing his why." What is our why? Thank God we are not in the dire situation that Or, Hirsch, or Viktor Frankl were in. Still, that lesson that Hirsch taught Or, that one who has a why can bear almost any how, can guide us through our own challenges and conflicts. What is our why? Like Or, it might be your children or grandchildren, or maybe it's a value, like security, justice, Jewish peoplehood, or community. That's something I'd like you to talk about today after services in the hallways here and at your Rosh Hashanah tables. What is your why? What is it that serves as your guiding light, your basic motivation for how you live your life at this moment? And how does that why impact the conflicts that you struggle with? I also think that this is a question worth asking about us as a Jewish people. What is our collective why? We know that we have many Jewish values. Our challenge is how we order them. What value do we prioritize for each situation? And what is the value that becomes our collective why? This is a dilemma that one Midrash teaches that God had on the very first Rosh Hashanah, the day the world was created. When God was about to create Adam, the very first human being, the angels, each representing a different value, argued about whether creating human beings was a good idea or a bad idea. Here's what they said. The angel of Chesed, of kindness, said, "Let Adam be created because he will perform deeds of kindness." And the angel of Emet, truth, said, "Adam should not be created because he will tell lies." The angel of Tzedek, of justice, said, "Let Adam be created because he will do justice." And the angel of Shalom, of peace, said, "Adam should not be created because he will fight." And on it went. Eventually, God sided with Chesed and Tzedek, with kindness and justice, and put aside Emet and Shalom, truth and peace. And here we are. Now, this doesn't mean that Emet and Shalom aren't important. Of course they are. But we know from our experience that, like God in creating the world, we too have to make choices. Sometimes we have to prioritize one value over another. Our time, our place, and our best judgment is how we determine which value to emphasize at a given time. This is how we discover our why. Our Machzor articulates many values, and you have heard sermons over the years that emphasize each one of them. In addition to Chesed and kindness, there's justice, mercy, forgiveness, truth, peace. The list goes on. Each one of them is important and could be a defining value for our moment, our why. Today, however, I think that one is paramount. One is our collective why for this moment. It is the why that can help us through almost any how. And that why is the value of Chaim, life. Life is what we pray for more than anything else today and throughout this season. We ask God, who we call Melech Hafetz B'Chaim, our God who longs for life, to Zochrenu L'Chaim, to remember us in life, and to Kotvenu B'Chaim, to inscribe us in the book of life. Life is our highest value. Just this past Shabbat, we read in the Torah the well-known words, Bacharta b'chayim, to choose life. And choosing life reminds me of a joke. A man once asked his rabbi, Rabbi, if I give up staying out late and partying and come to synagogue instead, will that help me live longer? No, the rabbi said, it won't help you live longer, but it'll make your life feel longer. I'm doing okay. Life, preserving life, living a good and meaningful life is our why. Life is our most sacred value, and it is also what makes our lives feel so complicated. In Israel, it is the value of life that creates a sense of conflicting certainties. Israeli author and thinker Yossi Klein Halevi articulated this in a powerful piece he wrote a couple of weeks ago. First, he said, we are certain that we must deny terrorists the ability to threaten the lives of Israeli citizens. The endless attacks, rockets, fear, and suffering that our Israeli brothers and sisters continue to endure must end. And second, Yossi writes, we are certain that it is our moral and legal responsibility to protect innocent lives in the most complicated battlefield the IDF or any army has ever fought. And this creates incredibly difficult moral dilemmas, especially when fighting against terrorists who don't value life one bit. Hamas murders innocent people and hides behind civilians, men, women, and children. And when we see the suffering happening in Gaza, our value of life compels us to feel empathy. This is part of what makes us Jews, a people the Talmud calls Rachmanim b'nei Rachmanim, compassionate ones, the children of compassionate ones. But we must not mistake this legitimate feeling of empathy with the main source of suffering that lies with a terrorist organization that is not at all conflicted about the suffering it causes for Jewish lives, Israeli lives, and Palestinian lives. Israel's government could certainly do better. Still, it is because life is our why, it is because we value life, that many of us feel conflicted about what we see happening in Israel and Gaza. It is because we value life that we know the hostages must come home, that Hamas must not be allowed to remain in power for this terrible war to end. That is what it means to prioritize life. And we also know that there are conflicts in our own country that challenge our why of life. Living the hyphen as Jewish Americans has become a lot more difficult. Acts of violence continue to plague our society. The dismantling of core institutions has put our democracy, in which Jews and other minorities have thrived, under threat. Anti-Semitism on the left and the right continues to grow and to become more mainstream. Even while we advocate and educate, we are conflicted about what all this means for our future and for the future of our children and our grandchildren. How can our why of life help us to endure this how? Rabbi David Wolpe, who has been one of the most important voices in fighting these battles against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism today, helps to put all of this in perspective. He notes that Judaism's commitment to life has always guided us forward. That commitment means not simply living life, but as we pray for today, living a life of bracha, of blessing, a life of tovah, of goodness. Rabbi Wolpe imagines himself in conversation with his great-great-grandfather about the challenges we are facing today. Here's how the conversation goes. I say to my great-great-grandfather, you know, there are anti-Semites causing problems for Jews at Harvard. And he says to me, there are Jews at Harvard? So I say, yeah, there are Jews at Harvard, but the anti-Semites there, they hate Israel. And he says, there's an Israel? Rabbi Wolpe concludes, we're at the crossroads again, but our ancestors would dream of having the problems we have. That does not mean that they're not problems, and it does not mean that we don't have to address them, and it does not mean that our future in different ways isn't imperiled. All of that is true. But boy, we can't forget how far we've come. There are many factors that have brought up to this moment, from being Polish Jews or German Jews or Russian Jews or Iraqi Jews to now being American Jews. There is much in our world to feel conflicted about, but despite it all, we are here and we are still Jews. And that is why, even in the difficult moments, I still believe in Elie Wiesel's words that I quoted last year. Jews, do not despair. Never mind that our enemies are powerful. Never mind that they seek our destruction. We shall resist them in our own Jewish way. Jews are able to draw new reasons for hope from their despair. Judaism teaches us to turn every experience into a dynamic force. Our strength is our freedom. Ultimately, we alone must decide what to do, what to be. We alone must decide our why. We make that decision, as our ancestors did, by affirming our values, especially today, our value of life. It might be the end of the world as we know it, but we have a tradition and a people that have traveled through the betweens before and have always come out better for it, and we will do so again today. Feeling conflicted means we care about the difficult task of applying our values to a complicated world. And the many prayers we say on Rosh Hashanah for life remind us that choosing life is a decision that we have to make over and over again each and every day. In our community, in our relationships with friends and family, and with Israel. We often like to point out that Chaim is a plural word, as if to say that life, to be truly lived well, must be lived with others, with family, with friends, with community. This is what our TBS family is and will continue to be for each one of us. A place where we can celebrate life, where we can work to infuse our lives with meaning and purpose, a place that reminds us of our sacred values and gives us the confidence to go out into the world as proud Jews, as Jews who don't despair, and to live those values. And by doing so, we will do everything we can to make it a Chaim Tovim Ushalom, a better and more peaceful life for all of us in the new year. Shana Tova. And we'll turn back